And if anybody wants to turn on their screens, it's always, or their video, it's always nice to see everyone and makes it a little bit better for connection. If you choose not to, that's fine also. But I'm going to go ahead and give it over to Don.
Okay, so assuming everyone can hear me.
Yep.
Great, thank you for that. So my name is Don Hobbs. I'm a broker based out of Boulder with Front Range Business Inc. We have brokers up in Fort Collins. We have in Evergreen, Breckenridge, Boulder, and various Denver locations. So I think we're at about 16 brokers with our company now. And we have been working with the Larimer Small Business Development Center for a number of years on various programs about buying, selling businesses. We currently have 3 that are our active series. One, which we offered in June, is called The 9 Stages of Any Business Transaction. And the purpose of that program is really to introduce everything that buyers and sellers go through from the moment that they decide they want to buy a business or sell a business until the closing, and even a little after. And so it's a great way to see what goes on to get a business purchased or sold. And that is available for replay. All of them are on the Front Range Business website. You can go find workshops there. The one we're doing today is looking very closely at the topic of valuation, how businesses get valued the way they do, why they get valued like that. We'll go through that process. We'll also look at financing. And the reason we add financing in with valuation is almost every business is going to be sold with financing from a commercial lender, probably an SBA guaranteed loan. And they will loan based upon their sense of the ability for the buyer to repay that loan. And so the price and the value of the business has to align with that. So we'll talk about that more in detail. And then the third program we do, and we're going to be doing this in August, talks about the contractual stages. So any transaction is going to go through a kind of a letter of intent stage. It's going to have a purchase agreement stage, and it's going to have a closing. And so there's a lot of legal and contractual elements related to that. So hopefully you might want to just check out on the Larimer SBDC site and register for contracts and legal coming up in August. So let's talk about what we're going to dig in here on our valuation and financing program. We're going to, put some general concepts out there. We also talk about rationale to invest. Why buyers want to buy a business. It's an economic choice. We'll talk about what is included when a business is sold. What are the primary elements? Then we'll dig into valuation. That's the largest part of today's program, and talk about financing. So we should cover some really good ground. So first of all, let's set the table on small business, defining small business. What is amazing is if you go out into the broader internet and marketplace and whatever, small businesses are defined as businesses that are actually probably much, much larger than anyone that is on this program or has a business will want. You can see SBA says 1,500 employees is small. But the reality is that as small business brokers, we see businesses 1 million in revenue, sometimes a little smaller, to $10 million in revenue, sometimes a little bigger. And that's sort of the small business world that we operate in. And it probably represents, as you can see, 90% of all businesses in the US have less than 20 employees. I want to talk about something that is really crucial to understand if a buyer and seller are going to find common ground and be able to work together on an acquisition of a business. I'm going to start with the sellers for a second. Sellers are often thinking very qualitatively about their businesses. They go to work every day where they're going to encounter a community of customers, employees that they may consider to be family. They're going to have supplier relationships. They're going to, think about all the years of sweat equity they've put in. They've innovated, they've done cool things. They've created a brand, a reputation. And a lot of times that seller has a personal identity in the community, sits on boards and commissions, and all of that is really tied to this business that they've been running for a long time. Yes, they want to know what their business is worth, but their attachment to the business is really to all of those qualitative things. The business goes on the market, in walk the buyers, and the buyers are kind of steely-eyed. They're like bankers. They're thinking quantitatively. They want to say, show me the numbers, show me the profits on this business. They're asking what the risks are. Sellers trying to sell the opportunities, the buyers trying to know what the risks are of buying that business. And buyers want to clearly know, if I purchase this business, will it support my lifestyle and investment objectives? Super, super important for sellers to get their thinking aligned with buyers, buyers get their thinking aligned with sellers, and really figure out how you're going to work together, given that you're coming from different places. Let's go to sellers for a second. If a seller is going to sell a business, invariably something has changed. We just don't see businesses are for sale where the business is humming along, it's doing great, sellers had it for 7 or 8 or 10 years, has no need to retire, has no need to do anything else. They don't sell that business. They sell the business when something has changed in their life or in their industry. And so sometimes there are good reasons. We call these the wonderful R's. It's retirement time. It's been a great career, but you're now 65 or 70, sometimes even 75. And you just know it's time. You want to go do other things. You can also have a relocation. Maybe a spouse has gotten a job in another city. You want to travel, you obviously stay together, or you want to be closer to your family. It could be that some other opportunity has come along. You want to reinvest the profits into a new venture. We see that. People selling their business and then buying another one that they feel they can do more with. So those are all positive reasons. Changes in the seller's life that lead. And there's the bad reasons. We call them the dreaded Ds. You can have a dissolution of a partnership. It's just not working out. You can have a divorce, disease, and the ultimate death. So not to spend too much time on these, but just to again reinforce, sellers are typically selling because something has changed. And if it hasn't, the business is probably not for sale. When you get out in the marketplace, and if you're a seller or if you're a buyer, there's a lot of assumptions, presumptions, misconceptions on the part of buyers and sellers. And so if you look down this list, our experience says that some of these things are going to be true. Some of these things are not going to be true. So let's look at one. Do owners, lenders, and buyers see the business differently? How about this one? Traditional valuation rules won't apply to my business because, and then the seller has their rationale for why the traditional valuation rules don't apply to their business. Buyers will pay for extra future potential. Strategic buyers pay more. Yeah, they need to acquire this to add on to their product line. Strategic buyer is a buyer who's probably going to move that business inside another business that they already own, either to expand geography or to expand product set, something like that. So more physical assets means higher value. When I say that, what I'm talking about is you can have a company that brings in $1 million in revenue and has almost no physical assets. Imagine a consulting business, right? Very little physical assets, and yet it's bringing in a lot of revenue. You might also have a machine shop that is just filled with expensive equipment and also brings in $1 million. So with physical assets, increase the value of the business. Value is different from price. Are price and value the same? What's true here? And when you go to market, the best strategy is to price high, then lower. So let's look at some answers. And unfortunately, the blue doesn't stand out as clearly as I would like here. But the only items on this list that are true are, number one, owners, lenders, buyers see the business differently. We'll talk about that in a minute. And value is different from price. We'll certainly be talking about that. All the other things simply aren't true. Traditional valuation rules are almost certain to apply to your business. Buyers don't pay for future potential because that's going to be their hard work, their investment that makes that happen. They're really looking at paying you for what's in place at the time they take over. Strategic buyers do not pay more. In fact, they pay less often. They make lower offers. They're very discretionary. They have no requirement to purchase that business. If they like it, they will, but they'll pass if they have to pay more. More physical assets means higher value? No. We'll talk about the fact that assets are part of the machine that generates profits. Without those assets, you couldn't have the profits. It's the profits that the buyers are buying. And the best strategy is to price high, then lower it. We go out to the market all the time. What we see is if you overprice your business, you just simply push buyers away. They don't even contact you because they think you're being unreasonable. Big negotiations of bouncing back and forth, numbers here and there. They typically lead to less goodwill, more tension between buyer and seller, and they often can just simply cause the deal to fall apart. So we talk about shared vision. So look at this picture, obviously. Perspective is everything. And so, if you are looking at it from only one direction, and you dig your heels in, say this is what it is, we won't get to the place where buyer and seller can work together. And so that's an important buyer and seller message. We also show this one. Sellers always very, very proud of their business, as they should be. They see it like this house in the upper left. Buyer comes in, says, well, yeah, it is a nice house. No question about it. It's a very nice house. And I'd like to buy this house, but I don't see it quite the way you see it. And then these advisors get involved, lenders, CPAs, whoever else becomes part of this deal. And, somehow, some way, they feel it's their responsibility to really scuttle the transaction. We talk a lot about being careful with who your attorneys are, who your CPAs are, and how to make that work. But again, just making it clear, shared vision. That's what we're going for here. Okay, let's move on and let's start digging in beyond these general concepts. And let's talk about expected returns. So this slide, I think, does a really good job of showing, down here are these passive investments. If you're able to put your money into certain passive investments, money markets, government bonds, up through stocks, you might get a return of 10% lower, maybe a little higher than 10%. Those are passive investments, and that's a reason to put your money there. If you buy a middle market company, and that's, a company doing 100 million or 500 million in revenue, considered a middle market business, that's going to be professionally managed. It's going to be a pretty solid business. It might give you a return of 13 to 33%. By the way, these are published through. I've got to look up where these numbers came from, but they're legitimate kind of numbers for that. And then small business is where the biggest returns are. Now you have to work for your money, but it is not unreasonable to see a return of 50, 75% annually on your investment. When I say investment, what I'm saying is if you bring $300,000 of your own money to the table to purchase $1 million business, that $300,000 might yield you $250,000 in profits annually. So your return on investment there would be what, 75%? So it's higher risk, but this is why small business owners buy businesses. They also buy to get out of the rat trap, get out of the corporate rat race. They want to, have a different kind of a lifestyle, but it's the return on investment is what they're really looking for. And what about that return on investment? It's not a paycheck anymore. It's a paycheck when you work for somebody, but when you go out and you own your own business, it's not a paycheck. And so the business that you have purchased must support 5 things, 4 for almost always, and a 5th one sometimes. So acquisition, loan, repayment. Just mentioned, most businesses are purchased with an SBA guaranteed loan. And so there's going to be a repayment requirement on that. And so that's going to come out of your profits. Some businesses require working capital. We'll talk about that in a minute, but that's that money over and above what you pay for a business that you have to operate. And you might have to borrow money to do that. So sometimes there's a working capital loan. Again, that's going to be paid for out of your profits. You are going to pay taxes. You might need to do business reinvestment. You might need to freshen things up a bit. It's going to come out of your profits. And of course, you're looking to support your owner lifestyle. So I think it's really key for buyers to understand, and this is where lenders get actively involved, because they're going to say, are you going to be able to repay this? They're not going to give you a loan if the loan isn't going to meet the requirements of these 5 bullet points, if the business profits aren't going to meet the requirements of these 5 bullet points, which is why businesses tend to be sold within a range of value that's understandable by everybody. The other thing to remember is, businesses, when you go to sell your business, you're in competition with every other business that is for sale. Just like when you go to sell a car, that car is in competition with every other car that's for sale. So you can't sell a $20,000 car for $30,000 because they can just go next door and buy the $20,000 car for $20,000. So you might have unique attributes to your business. There might be special things, but that's why value tends to come in. And we'll be looking at that. Okay, here are reasons to buy. So a lot of times there's always a question on the buyer's side. Should I build a new business or should I buy an existing business? And so as brokers, we sell businesses. So we are working typically with buyers who are interested in purchasing an existing business. What is the difference between build and buy? Well, an existing business has cash flow. On the day you purchase the business, there's cash flow and or profits, whatever term you want to use, but it starts immediately. If you build a business, you're going to figure out what you're going to sell, and then you're going to find a place to put it, and then you're going to get a lease, and then you're going to hope that first customer comes in. You'll probably have some sort of pro forma that shows your growth over 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 years, and you're hoping you're going to meet that, but you're guessing about the future. With an existing business, there's a lot less guesswork. That cash flow is known right from the start. You get the benefit of the seller having gone through the learning curve. That seller is going to transfer that knowledge to you, and that business is going to operate with that learning curve in place, which, by the way, includes probably talented employees who know how to do their thing right from the get-go. You're not going to be teaching them. You're buying a slice of the pie, existing market. If you open your own new business, you've got to carve something out of someone else's pie to get your customers and get your revenues. However, if you buy an existing business, that slice of the pie is yours from the get-go. You can go after more, but you get that right from the start. Business-specific training provided, talked about that with the seller going through the learning curve. Risk may be lower or more quantifiable. Any small business is risky. Buyers just need to be aware of that. COVID, who would have projected COVID in December of 2019? By March 15th of 2020, we were totally shut down. Small business takes risk about those kinds of things happening. Industry trends can change, so on and so forth. But with an existing business, you can get a sense. How did they weather the storm in previous economic recessions? What is going on here? How can I step in? So it could be much lower. You always have the potential to improve the business. I always tell the story. I sold a business. Oh gosh, it's been 7 years now. And the sellers were wanting to retire. And the buyer said, why don't they do this? And I went and asked the seller, and the seller said, oh, we looked at that, but we didn't think it would be that good of an add-on to our business. So we just never did it. And the buyer sort of nodded and bought the business, added that extra service, doubled the size of the business in the first year, and really increased and improved that business. So as a buyer coming in, you're paying for what's there, but you might have the opportunity to do something on your own to grow it, improve it. And of course, investment leverage through an SBA loan. The buyer may only need to come up with 15 or 20% of the cost of purchasing a business. And so, buying $1 million business with $200,000, not bad. Buyers in general are looking to purchase the most expensive business that they can purchase, and they do that through leverage of the loan. Okay, let's go to chapter 3 here. Oh, by the way, I had to relocate in another location, and so I don't have everything open that I would like to have open because I'm in a tough spot. But I do see that there is a question about explaining business reinvestment. And by business reinvestment, I just mean things wear out. You might need to replace vehicles if you have you're doing construction and you provide vehicles out in the field. They wear out, so you need to reinvest in vehicles. You might need to get a new point of sale system. You might need to do some leasehold improvements. It's really anything that you would incur costs to keep your business up to current and up to speed. So hopefully that answers the question on business reinvestment. Okay, primary elements of a business sale. Just want to introduce that a business can be sold a number of ways. It can be sold as an asset sale. It can be sold as a stock sale. It could be a merger, a number of things. But when we're talking about small businesses, we're really talking about asset sales. That's how almost all small businesses get transferred. So let's look at what an asset sale is. I'll quickly say, what is a stock sale? A stock sale is where you buy the entire corporation. You buy all the liabilities that come with that. You have, whatever is going on, you get it. It becomes your world as the new owner. Most small businesses do not want to take on that liability. They want to exclude certain things from the sale and only include those things that really relate to the operations of the business. So in an asset sale, you might have the ABC Corp that runs the XYZ business. So in an asset sale, the seller would keep ABC Corp as a business entity and would sell XYZ business as an operating component. The buyer, taking possession of that operating component, would create a new company, New Buyer Company, Inc., or perhaps they already have one and they use an existing one. But now they've created a new entity to put the operating elements of the business in. Some or all of the assets of the business transfer. When I say some or all assets, there could be assets that the buyer doesn't want and prefers the seller to dispose of. There could be assets that the seller wants to retain. A lot of small businesses, for example, the seller's personal car is owned by the business, so that asset would not transfer in the sale. And then with an asset sale, the seller retains existing and contingent liabilities. So they're going to be responsible for accounts payable up to the date of closing. They're going to be responsible for taxes during the period of the year that they own the business. If there's any pending litigation, say an employee is suing the business, that's going to stay with the seller. That's going to be the seller's responsibility to deal with it. I do make a note here, taxes follow the assets. That's kind of a buyer beware, that even though the seller retains the liability for taxes, if the seller doesn't perform on that, that tax liability can transfer to the buyer. So you want to make sure you're protecting yourself from that. Seller is also going to retain in an asset sale all the cash that's in the bank account and accounts receivable for any goods that have been sold prior to the closing, because they did the work, so they get the accounts receivable. And then there are certain things that have to get worked out. Let's say you own a wedding venue and you sell it, and you've taken deposits for some upcoming weddings, 50%. Well, seller doesn't get to keep all of those deposits. Maybe the seller gets to keep 5% of them because of the time they put in related to bringing that business in, but they don't get to keep all the deposits. Gift cards, there's going to be liability. Some businesses have lots and lots of gift cards out there, don't have many, but let's say there's $5,000 in gift cards that are circulating. The New buyer is going to be responsible for delivering those services or products. So those gift card, that value has to transfer to the buyer. Work in progress are things that are half built. Imagine a car going down the assembly line. It's half built. The business is sold. How much does the buyer pay for that car? How much does the seller keep for that car? That's a negotiated element. But again, we're talking about asset sales. So just want to get that clear. That's what we're looking at. And let's look now at what a business sale actually includes. Now, it includes a lot of things, but they all fall into these four buckets. And we'll talk about each of them. This is just an overview slide. There's real property interest, where the business is located, whether that property is owned or leased. There's tangible assets, tangible, hard goods, cars, equipment, computers, point of sale systems, often called personal property. There is goodwill and intangible assets. You have a brand, you have a website, you have a customer list. All of those things contribute to your ability to make money. And then there's working capital. Working capital sometimes gets put together in a transaction. Sometimes the seller just keeps their money, the buyer brings additional money. But working capital can be an element of the business sale. So these are the things you're buying or selling. It's the cumulative value of these four things. All of these contribute to the profitability of the business. And when it comes right down to it, the profitability of the business is what the buyer is acquiring. So let's look at real property. There's a couple of different scenarios that could exist here. One is the seller actually owns it. So you have a business that's operating in a building, and the seller owns both the business and the building. So they could sell that building to the business buyer. Buyer buys the business, buyer buys the building. They're two separate transactions, but they happen concurrently. I can tell you that lenders love businesses where there's a building because that gives them a lot more flexibility to secure the loan, less goodwill, more value in the building. But the seller might decide, I don't want to sell the business. I want to keep the building. I want to keep it. So I'm going to retain the building, and I'm going to become a landlord to the new buyer of my business. So then you would create a lease situation between the buyer and the seller for the business to occupy that space. And we say rent may need normalization. If the landlord previously owned the business, if the seller previously owned the business and the building, it doesn't matter how much rent they're paying. It's just going out of one pocket and into the other pocket. But if they sell to a third party, they're probably going to want something that's more market rate. And so keep in mind that if that means the new buyer pays a higher rent than the seller was paying himself, that new buyer is going to have lower profits. And if the new buyer has lower profits, that changes the value of the business. Because again, the value of a business is based on its profitability. There is a third scenario you can have where the seller owns, and that's sell to third party on the open market. I can tell you this is complicated. There are timing issues. There's more additional parties. There's a lot of competing interests. You're not going to want to go that route if you can help. Okay, let's go to real property where it's actually owned by a third person. The seller owns the business. The buyer's buying the business, and there's a third party that owns the real property where the business has a lease. In that case, the buyer's going to come in. The buyer's going to lease the real property from that third party landlord. That will either be through an assignment or a new lease. it will need to meet SBA loan requirements. And by that, I mean, if you have an SBA loan to purchase the business for 10 years, you're going to need a lease that provides the right to occupy those premises for 10 years. The SBA doesn't want you getting kicked out of your where you do business. And so, any lease you put together will need to be between the landlord and the SBA lender and you to make sure everybody's covered. And of course, if the seller has done leasehold improvements, if they've built things in, if they've added extra power to the building, or cooling units or heating units, or other kinds of built-in fixtures and stuff. Ultimately, while the seller paid to put those in, they belong to the landlord because they're attached to the building, and so they're going to transfer with the building. They're not anything that the seller can take out. And then the other one is the buyer could purchase the real property from the landlord. I have done this where the business is for sale and the buyer says, I'd like to find out if the building is also for sale from the person who owns it, who's a third party. And I've had situations where that third party has said, yeah, I'm prepared to sell the building. And so we've been able to put a transaction together where the buyer is purchasing the business from one person and the building from another. Just keep in mind that the business seller and the building seller may not have the same objectives. And if the building seller puts a super high price on the building, therefore the cost of paying off the loan on that rent will be higher. That increased building cost is going to lower the business value. So sometimes you're going to make sure you can get everybody's objectives aligned. Let's talk about tangible assets in a sale. This is your furniture, fixtures, and equipment, which could be machinery, field equipment, tools, computers, anything that is a tangible element that moves, that is not attached to the building, are your furnitures, fixtures, and equipment. And it can also include any office furniture you have. If you're a retail store, it could be retail fixtures. You might have vehicles. All of that are your FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. The other tangible assets you're going to have is inventory. Now, a consulting business doesn't necessarily have inventory, but a retail business has inventory. And so that inventory is going to be part of the transaction. It needs to be counted. And typically when you put a contract together, you specify an amount that's included in the price. So let's say this retail store is selling for $1 million, which will include $200,000 of inventory. Now, the inventory has to be saleable. Any inventory that's back there on the clearance rack that's selling for 70% off isn't going to be worth the same thing as brand new inventory that's in the front of the store. So you're going to make adjustments from the original cost for what the value of that inventory might actually be, and appropriate levels. We tell a story around the office. There was a person who had a business, went to rodeos, sold cowboy hats and clothes and whatever out of a trailer. And it turned out they had 17 pairs of the exact same size of pants and style of pants. And they were selling about 1 to 2 pairs per year, which means they had 8 years of inventory for those pants, or 10. And so, that's not an appropriate level of inventory. That's going to be discounted by a buyer. But those are your tangible assets. And then a point that we make, and we make it over and over and over again, is that assets exist to generate profits. The only reason that at the end of the day the business makes profits is because it has this machinery, this field equipment, these vehicles. It has inventory, and so on and so forth. So selling a business without those things, it doesn't make any sense, which is why a certain amount of inventory, generally it's like an average level of inventory that the business should need. You could have a business that's very seasonal, that scales up and then scales back down, so the inventory levels change. But assets exist to generate profits. So it's really important. We're really not valuing your assets. They're there, but we're valuing your profits, and it's your assets. And if you have FF&E or inventory that is non-productive, it's not worth anything because it's not contributing to the profitability of the business. Okay, working capital. Really quickly, that's the money a buyer needs in addition to sales price for the efficient operation of the business. Every business is different. A restaurant doesn't need very much working capital because every day they're going to be taking money into the cash register, so they can use that money. But if you have a manufacturing, and the manufacturing occurs over an extended period of time, and you don't get paid until you finally get that product out the door and in someone's hands, you may need large reserves of capital for your business. So that's what working capital is in a small business sense. Working capital is typically not included with the business price in an asset sale, although we sometimes see you agree on the price and then you raise the price $200,000 and include $200,000 in the transaction. And lenders like that, because if the business is still financeable at that new higher price, they're not putting working capital at risk through their lender. It's already been included in the transaction. So we see that, but it typically is not in the business price in an asset sale. And of course, working capital factors into SBA lending. We see a lot of businesses that need $400,000, $600,000, $700,000 in working capital. The buyer can buy the business for $1.5 million. Let's say they bring $300,000. SBA loans $1.2 million. But all of a sudden, it needs another $600,000 or $700,000 in working capital for this type of business, and that can get sticky. And it's going to be a big part of how the SBA lenders look at your business. Okay. The final thing is goodwill, intangible assets. So we talked about the real property. We talked about the tangible assets. We talked about the working capital. This is the fourth element of the sale, the goodwill, intangible assets. So customer list, trade name, patents, website, experienced employees, quality of location, documented systems and processes. All of these things, they're intangible. You can't put a specific value on it. You don't say my customer list is worth $3,800. My trade name is worth $12,000. My patents are worth $50,000. It doesn't work like that. All of these things contribute to profits. And just like on the previous slide, where we said assets exist to generate profits, that applies to both tangible and intangible assets. All of these things, the quality of your customer list, the contracts you have, lock those customers in with you, all of your trademarks, all of those things are baked into your profitability. And remember, buyers are buying the profitability. Okay, so goodwill, what's goodwill? You are gonna have a real value on your physical assets. You are gonna have a real value on the real working capital potentially, but goodwill is really the difference between what the business sells for and the value of those physical assets. Now, we get to move on. Let me see. I looks like I got a couple more questions, perhaps. I want to. Susan Kaiser asked. She wanted to ask how goodwill and tangible assets are valued. Again, I think I just covered that. They roll through into profitability, and really they just become part of valuing the business based on its profitability. You don't take them. Also, how would one appraise the inventory? Great question. So most people, it depends on the kind of business, what kind of inventory you have. But literally, it's a count. We see buyers and sellers working together to actually count the inventory that's on hand. It's going to depend on the type of business, whether that makes sense or not. And sellers usually have a very, very good idea of how much inventory and what kind it takes to run their business, because that's a controllable area that really matters to them. So usually you can bring in third-party evaluators, but what we typically see is we see buyers and sellers putting together a list of what the inventory is and then having a negotiation around what they're going to pay for that, what they're going to price that. Okay, let's dig into valuation for a second. This is really the best part of what today's about. Here's what I tell everybody on the front end. I tell the sellers and I tell the buyers. You cannot be smarter than the market. And by market, I mean the pool of buyers who are interested in your business. So, working with a broker, that broker is going to give you an idea of the value of your business. Sellers may want to try and price it a little higher than that. It's understandable. As a broker, if the sellers want to set an unreasonable price, I tend to just back out. I don't think that's the right way to go to market with any business. So I don't participate in that. But ultimately, once that price is set and you're in the market, it's the buyers who come to look at that business who determine the value. And we see businesses that sell for more than we've priced it, and we see businesses that sell for less, and sometimes we see it sell right on the money. But the market is ultimately going to determine what your business is going to bring. A business is worth its transferable value. That's super important. If a business is, and we'll show you how we calculate this, but if a business is creating seller's discretionary earnings, we'll talk about that, of $300,000 a year. If that full $300,000 is not transferable to the new owner for some reason, then the business is not going to be worth its full value like it would otherwise be. So it's important to keep that in mind. And as we said, a business is in competition with all other businesses for sale. And we've talked about lenders. Lenders can get involved here and they can say, hey, you know what? There's just not enough profits for us to fund this loan at that price. And then, everybody has to decide what they're going to do. Is the buyer going to be able to just snap their fingers and come up with another $250,000? Not likely. Okay. Value influencers. I bring this up, and this is for sellers to really take a look at before you go to market. All of these things, some of these things are things that you can actually change, right? And so some of these you can't change, but, desirable industry, is this in some type of business that people want to be in? Are you going to be in the solar panel business? That's likely a very desirable business to be in. Sales profile concentration. Do you have one customer or do you have 300 customers? Do you sell all of your all of your stuff in one seasonal period, or do you spread it out over the year? How about your customer base? Are they under contract? Are they going to come back? How do you know they're going to come back? Are they recurring? Recurring versus project revenue. You know, a new home construction builder is project revenue, right? Building one home at a time, and you know they get the revenue from that project. They do another one. Recurring revenue might be like we clean office buildings, and we go in and we get recurring revenue. We have a contract to do that. We go in every 2 weeks. So one feels riskier than the other. Competition and barriers to entry. You know, if anybody can just come in and open a store right next door to yours that does the same thing, and you can't control that, that's a risk. You want to look at the owner's role. I tell owners, be as useless as possible, as dispensable as possible. Make sure that you're turning over a business where the management and the staff and the labor base are capable of running that business to a great extent. So it's not dependent on you, because if it is dependent on you and you're irreplaceable, how can a new owner come in? That doesn't mean you're not integral. It just means you got to have a business that can transfer to a new. Is your facility the right size? Is it too big? Is it too small? Where is it located? Do you have the right technologies to carry your business forward? Or are you behind the curve? Is your location good? Is at least all of these things, by the way, all of these have probably factored into your profitability as well. But to the extent that you can take a look at those and change them, or at least be aware of those influencers, that's part of what makes a business useful. And this last one, size matters, just so you know. The larger a business is, the more it's going to be sold as a multiple of its profits. Okay. So we've talked about, and I kind of alluded to, that it's the profits that help determine the value of the business. So let me just dig in here and say the most common calculation by far is to calculate the value by calculating the earnings and multiplying that by something, the multiple, and that gives you your business value. This is the most common method for all small businesses. And here's why it's really important. I mentioned that you're in competition with every other business that's for sale out there. So if all businesses can demonstrate how the value was arrived at, earnings times a multiple, then you get an apples to apples comparison. This business is $300,000 in earnings, priced at $750,000. This building is $300,000. This business is $300,000, priced at $800,000. This one is $300,000 earnings, priced at $1 million. There's three businesses. They earn the same amount. They're in the same industry. They're priced differently. They're in competition with each other. Buyers will be comparing those things and trying to decide, what are the factors? Are there risk factors? Are there other reasons why these might be different? And if they can find those other reasons, then maybe they could go for a higher price business. But remember that very first slide where we said traditional business value doesn't apply to my business because ... You better have a really good because. You better have a really, really good because to step outside of the traditional route. So earnings, there's different ways to calculate earnings. I'm just going to jump right to seller's discretionary earnings. That's smaller owner-operated business. So let's look at that. What is seller's discretionary? When we're doing a valuation. By the way, if we're doing a valuation of the business, the very first thing we're trying to find out is seller's discretionary earnings. How much money does this business make? So a couple of definitions. One, it's all of the financial benefit that one working owner can derive from the business, assuming normal operation and no debt. Super important when you see no debt. Sellers, for the most part, have no debt. They have dispensed with any debt they had previously. They're keeping all of the seller's discretionary earnings for themselves. We keep that as seller's discretionary earnings. But don't forget that a buyer coming along will take those seller's discretionary earnings and they will be reduced by the amount of debt that a buyer has to take on to acquire that business. So while we calculate value from it, that doesn't mean the buyer is going to get all of those sellers' discretionary earnings. Okay. Valuation is based upon historical performance. Yes, future opportunities could be one of those value influencers that allow us to price up a little bit in the market. If we can make that case to buyers, buyers are going to be reasonable. They'll understand that. But you can't say, if you add these 6 new products, this business will be worth twice as much as it is today, and then get a buyer to pay you as if you had already done that. They're going to pay you for what you have done historically, and that value has to be transferable to the new owners. And all the SDE elements have to be recorded on financial statements and taxes. When seller's discretionary earnings is shared with a buyer, it is a black and white document. And the buyer sees it and knows exactly how you got to that $300,000 value. They may disagree with some. They may agree with all of it. But you have to be able to show them in black and white exactly how you did it using your business financial statements and your taxes, so that the buyers understand that this is the real deal and you're not just making this up. Unreported income not included, not nearly as common today in the age of the credit card, but there are still a lot of businesses where there's a lot of cash floating around. And somehow, some way, that cash is not making its way into the system, into the POS system or whatever. It's not accounted for. The seller has an untaxed pot of cash that they've been getting every year. We're not here to judge as brokers, but we're here to tell you that that is a very difficult thing to get a buyer to accept. Number one, they now know that you've been operating fraudulently. So if you're willing to do that on your taxes, where else are you willing to do it? And number two, how do you quantify that? How do you decide? So how can you sell that extra amount of money to them that they'll get if they keep the cash for themselves, or even if they run it through the system? So as a broker, I do not deal with unreported income. I will not let it be a part of any valuation. So anyway, that's seller's discretionary earnings. That is a really important number. It's going to be the basis for valuing that. So what are we going to use? We're going to thoroughly analyze 3 to 5 years of financials, business tax returns, profit and loss, income statements, balance sheets, monthly sales. Each of these things has a purpose. Monthly sales is a super important way to find out what the trend lines look like. I've looked at a business where call it the 2014 and 2015 years were exactly the same in terms of annual income. But it turned out that there was kind of a steady growth in 14, then a faster growth at the start of 15, and then it just plunged in the last 4 months of the year. It was a spawn that lost all of its employees. All of a sudden, there were no employees to generate profits. So if all you were looking at was annual, you'd say pretty consistent year over year. If you're looking at the monthlies, you say, what the heck happened here? You can also see seasonal businesses that spike in the summer, or spike in the winter, spike around the holiday season or whatever. And it's important to know that because the operation of the business is going to be built around that, along with financial requirements. So these are the key things that you're going to want, that a broker doing an SDE calculation will want: the tax returns, profit and loss, balance sheets, monthly sales. There are some other things that go into helping value the business a little. Could be leases, contracts with customers, things like that. So we can quantify those, but these are the ones that are always. Okay, so with those documents, we are going to be looking for anything that is in those financials that we're going to need to add into profitability or maybe adjust. And so, we're going to take the net operating income. We're going to add the owner's salary and benefits. Remember, SDE is the financial benefit of one owner. So not only is the net operating income, the profit, a benefit, but what the owner pays herself or himself is a benefit. Retirement contributions for the owner is a benefit. We deduct interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. First of all, again, we are assuming no debt. If there's no debt, there would be no interest. So if there were interest paid, we would take that out or add it back. Taxes, every business owner is going to have different kind of taxes based on their entity. Are they an LLC? Are they an S Corp? Are they a C Corp? Are they a sole proprietorship? We never know what the taxes are going to be for any individual owner of a business. So we take the taxes out. The buyer has to be aware they're going to have taxes, but it's not in the SDE calculation. Depreciation and amortization are expenses that show up on your P&L, but you didn't actually spend any money to get those. And so they get added back. Non-operating expenses. We're looking for, we put all new signage on the outside of the business last year and it cost us $18,000. Well, you can add that back into your profits because the buyer is not going to have to do new signage. It's been done. It'll be in place for the next 10 or 15 years. So that's add back. Or maybe there was a legal settlement or something. So anytime there is, or maybe you sold a piece of equipment for $10,000 and you showed it as income. Well, the buyer's not going to be able to sell that piece of equipment again. So that's going to be a negative adjustment. We'll look at that. Normalized expenses or revenues. Hey, we talked about rent. Maybe you need to raise the rent, lower the rent. Maybe there's this change or that change. We'll talk about these. And discretionary expenses. You're the owner of a business. If you would like to donate $10,000 to the American Cancer Society, do it. Do it. But those $10,000 get added back into SDE because they're, in essence, you've chosen to use your profits, discretionary use of those profits. Okay, now we'll take each of these in detail. Net operating income. That's the bottom line of the P&L. And your bottom line of your P&L should align with your taxes. That's a corroborating step that says the P&L I'm looking at and the taxes that this company incurred are the same. That makes these financials more trustworthy for me. And there aren't any gaps. We know that the P&L is often deliberately low. It's a tax reduction strategy. So we know that's common. So here's the ABC company. Turns out they have net income on their taxes, P&L of $275,000. That's where we're going to start our calculation of SDE. Now, we have owner's salary and benefits, W-2 wages, guaranteed payments, health, life, disability, retirement plans. So those total 125,000 more. So if we add that owner's salary and benefits to the 275,000 net income, we're now at a $400,000 seller's discretionary. Why are distributions not included? Distributions, for a lot of sellers, the owners of businesses on this call, they know, when you take money and you put it over in your bank account, as the owner of business, you can take some of that money out for yourself, and it has a different tax basis. And so it's a way to get money to the owner of a business at a lower tax liability. However, the reason we don't include it is because that money shows up in the bank account after it's already been counted on the net income line. So if you counted distributions, you'd be double counting that money. That's why it's not in there. Okay, then we make some financial adjustments, as we talked about. We're going to add back depreciation and amortization. Those were on the P&L. They lowered the net income line, but you didn't write a check for depreciation or amortization. And so you get to add those back. So we were at 400,000. Now we're at 450. There were no taxes on the P&L. Taxes were paid outside of that. Every once in a while, they show up. If they do, we have to take them back out. And interest, in this case, the seller had no loans. So there was no debt, no interest. So we're not dealing with that. So those are the financial adjustments. Then there's a one-time expense or revenue, relocation, remodel, legal matter. Maybe you did an inventory write-down to get rid of a whole bunch of old inventory. You took a loss for that. You purchased something that you didn't capitalize, or you had a gain or loss in the sale of assets. So in this case, this business moved. It cost them $50,000. We added that back into profits. There was a legal matter and a settlement, cost them $10,000. We added that back into profits. They sold a vehicle. We took that off the profits. So now we're at $500,000 in SDE. Remember, we were at $275,000 for the net income line. We boosted up to $500,000. But now we need to make some normalization to make the P&L reflect typical operations. So common adjustments might be rent changes. You might have a family member salary that you are paying almost nothing. The spouse is doing all of the bookkeeping for no money, and the buyer's going to have to hire and replace that spouse and do all the bookkeeping. That might be a $25,000 a year expense. I'm just making up numbers here, but so looking at that, or a rent adjustment of $25,000. So now we're doing some negative adjustments to SDE. We're coming down from 500,000. We're back to, with normalized expenses, to 450. And then these are the discretionary things we talked about: non-business travel and entertainment, charitable contributions, personal benefit. Yeah, the car's in the business, paid my kids' tuition. Hey, I put a new patio on my home. You're the business owner. Do what you want to do with the business. That's your business to do. But when we're calculating SDE, we want to make sure we are aware of all of those items, and they all get put into this calculation. And then that calculation is presented in black and white to the buyer. This is the seller's discretionary earnings for this business. Without that, you would have a very difficult time to sell a business. Everything we just went through, you're looking at it right here. 275K for this particular business in net income becomes a 475K SDE. So having gone through that, we've done the earnings. Now let's look at the multiple. We have $475,000 that's going to be multiplied by something. As we say, your business is unique, just like everybody else's business. But the reality is buyers are buying your profits, and there is a maximum that they are going to pay to acquire those profits. They aren't going to pay more because they like the wallpaper. They aren't going to pay more because they think you have a cool logo. They're going to assume that that wallpaper and that logo were contributory to making the profits that you made, and they're going to purchase the profits from it. Now, what is the multiple range? We see it as low as 1 times the earnings, and we see it as high as 4 times the earnings. So the larger the business, the larger the multiple. Your business better be selling for $3 million or more to get even a 3.5 multiple, and it better be selling for $8 million or more to get a 4 times multiple. If you have a business that's selling for $800,000, it is very, very unlikely that you would get that. Multiple range spans. So, and we talked about the value influencers. Here's the national average, 2.2 for all small businesses, 2.2. There are some categories that sell for more, but keep in mind, that's the national average. And over the last 20 years, very little drift with respect to that. Here's a look at it on a chart. So the median revenue, $2,323,000, median sales price, $1 million, or the SDE on that, 345. You might be able to get a 3 multiple on a 345,000, and that's the first quintile. Those are the larger small businesses, not the largest ones, but the larger small businesses, but the kind of businesses that a local owner and local owner operator typically has. And then it starts going down, just looking at the column on the right and looking at the revenue column on the left, or the SDE column, you can see that they go down. They sell for less as a business gets smaller. And so I just encourage sellers, unless you're bringing something that nobody's ever seen before, and think of SDE times 3 as a max, probably times 2 as a floor, unless you're a very, very small business. And somewhere in there is what your business is probably going to be valued at. This was based on 4,300 business sale transactions. So it's a good data set to make this work. And industries can be different. Over here, if you're in healthcare, social assistance, multiples might be 2. If you're in construction, might be 2.4. If you're in manufacturing, might be 3. If you're in finance and insurance, might be 3.6. This one is showing 2.5 for all sectors. So we were on 2.2 with a previous look at some numbers. This is 2.5. I think it's clear to see, hey, regardless of which data set you use, there's a range that's pretty identifiable, and we won't be able to move out of that range tremendously. So here's our valuation result. We just made it up for this business. The SDE earnings, 475. The multiple, we've arrived at this. We've looked at the industry. We've looked at some comparative sales. We've looked at some other things, some factors about what the future for this business might hold. We've decided it's 2.5. Having calculated the SDE, figured out what the market multiple should be, we're able to arrive at a business value, $1,187,500. So that's a valuation result. If you want to get more, and I have sellers say to me, well, I need to get more for my business, I understand. Here's how you do it. Increase the profitability, reduce the reliance on the owner, systematize and document the processes so it's easier for a new owner to take over. That'll probably also give you a chance to find ways to lower your costs. Have clean, professionally prepared financials. Owners don't hardly need the P&L for many businesses they run to actually run the business because they're in there every day. So they don't look at it that carefully. But buyers depend on the quality of those financials to determine whether this is an appropriate risk to enter into this business. And trust me is not a good way to sell a business. You need to put the documents. Trust, but verify. Have customer and product diversity. Don't have all of your business with 1 or 2 or 3 clients. Get contracts, renewable, evergreen contracts, non-reported income. So how do you end the unreported income thing? Start reporting it and pay taxes on it. After 2 years of that, you'll have new numbers that will include that revenue, and you get more value increase than you were actually saving yourself in cutting your taxes. So it's a net plus to start paying your taxes. We talked about traditional returns, looking at it again, just so you can see it. I want to see, we got a couple of questions here. Great question from Vitor. Bueno. Given that interest rate is higher, do you see valuation getting reduced? Yes, because buyers are having to pay more of the seller's discretionary earnings to pay off the loan, leaves less for themselves. So it not only impacts the buyer's view of that, it impacts the lender's view. So we see that that is, in fact, putting some downward pressure. I'm not sure that that's necessarily showing up in the initial valuation and go-to-market price, but we are seeing caution on the part of buyers and maybe a little more negotiation around the price. Gary asked, I missed how the tangible assets are factored into the pricing. The multiplier doesn't include those, does it? No. And Gary, the answer for everyone, the reason that we don't really think of the assets as a separate item to be valued is because without those assets, you couldn't be making profits. And the buyer is making the profits. So assets exist to generate profits. There are a few exceptions. Sometimes, for example, a liquor store might sell the business plus inventory as a separate amount. And there are reasons for that. And it has to do with how much stock is going to be on the shelf at closing and a few other things. They would probably likely reduce the multiple a little bit on the price and then layer in the inventory on top of that. Look at this. Cash asked the question, why do some businesses include inventory and price and some don't, like liquor store? Is there benefit either way? There really is not a benefit. It's kind of a little bit of what is the market used to. And the reason I say that is at the end of the day, when you have sold your business, whether you sell it for $800,000 plus $200,000 in inventory, or you sell it for $1 million, including $200,000 in inventory, you're still receiving $1 million, and you're still allocating $200,000 of that transaction to inventory. And allocation of the purchase price is a whole nother discussion area, but they come out the same. So it's more habit with liquor stores. It's not anything else. Okay, I think that takes care of the questions we have for right now. I do want to talk about financing the transaction. Looks like we have 9 minutes left. There's only 3 sources of funds. When a business gets purchased, the buyer is going to bring some money. The lender is going to bring some money. And sometimes the seller brings some money in the form of a seller. That's not 100%, but that's very, very common. So let's look at the buyer cash. So typically 10 to 25% of price. It'll come out of the buyer's personal bank accounts. Buyer might liquidate some stocks or mutual funds, might get a HELOC, a home equity loan, might liquidate or at least draw down an IRA or retirement plan. There is a financing technique called a Hobbs, rollovers as business startups, where you can use the money in your IRA to buy a business without liquidating it. It's a mechanism. It gets used relatively frequently. I'd be happy to share more on that if anybody wants to contact me. And you can get family and friends to give you, an equity position in the business or a gift. So that's where buyers are going to get their pool of money. And as I mentioned before, buyers want to buy the largest and most profitable business that they are able to get, because that's how they're best rewarded. That's how their return on investment is highest. And so buyers are typically looking for those businesses that they can acquire with 10, 15% down. When it goes to 25%, there might be a particular reason for that, but 10, 15% is what we really see buyers trying to do. Used to be 20. We're seeing 10 to 15 now. And don't forget, on top of that price, that $1 million price we just talked about for that liquor store, there's working capital requirements to keep inventory in place or support manufacturing operations prior to selling goods. So those can be quite high or they can be low, depending on the kind of business. Second source of funds is SBA lending. We're seeing lenders put 70% to 90% of the price into a deal, typically a 10-year loan for a business, but they can go 25 years for real estate. And if there is a business plus real estate loan, they can get that business financed out for 25 years by combining the two of them, which really lowers the payments for a buyer. So finding a business with a building that you can package up, buyers love that. And sellers, you have a special opportunity if that's what you're offering. Lending is based on the cash flow. Why? Because lenders want to make sure that the profits of the business will yield enough money for debt repayment and those other items we talked about: owner salary, reinvestment, and taxes. So and working capital. So they want to make sure, and that's why they look carefully at the financials and look carefully at the SDE calculations, cash flow, to make sure that they will get repaid. If there's anything a bank wants, it's to get repaid. They emphasize debt coverage ratio. That just means there's enough profits there to pay. They also look at lifestyle support. You could have a buyer who only needs, house is paid for, doesn't need to relocate, only needs $80,000 a year out of the business to support that lifestyle. But you could have another person who has a huge mortgage, has 4 kids in college, has all kinds of expenses, and they need $300,000 out of the business. So that seller's discretionary earnings is going to support those 2 different people very differently. And lenders look at that. They look at what the buyer's personal needs are. And they say, I've seen it. You can't buy this business. There's not enough profit in this business to support you. So they don't loan. SBA will always require an independent valuation. Typically, those work out just fine, but they're a requirement. Lenders are looking for strong credit, operating qualifications. Have you done this before? Do you have transferable skills? The SBA loan will be in first position for repayment. It will be ahead of the lease, and it will be ahead of the seller note, meaning the SBA can literally cause a seller note to be paused for repayment if they feel at risk for getting their SBA loan repaid. You will have personal guarantees as a buyer. They will collateralize your personal assets if you have them. Interestingly enough, if you live in an apartment and you don't own a home, you are not penalized. You're not required to own a home. But if you own one and you have a certain amount of equity, you have to have that collateralized. And of course, the lender will always be looking at your working capital requirements, and they may be the people providing them. Third place that money comes from, seller promissory note. It's typically not there, 0, or up to 20% of price, unless there's no SBA lender who's going to cover this business, in which case the seller becomes responsible for financing everything that the buyer is unable to put on the down payment. So it's a supplement to the buyer cash plus SBA loan. The SBA lender may require it. They may simply say, you have to put a seller note of 10% on this, or we won't finance the deal. You can sometimes use the fact that there's a seller note to improve the price. For example, if there's an offer of $800,000 with no seller note and an offer of $850,000 with a $100,000 seller note, you can get an extra $50,000 by taking a note for the 100. And so, that can be useful. There's no tax due on the payoff on the seller promissory note until the money is received in the payment. So it can provide a deferral of taxes, can be beneficial. Talked about it subordinate, the SBA loan, 2 to 8 years is common, usually personally guaranteed by the buyer. And reverse earnout structure. Boy, I'm not going to go into that because we're late today, but if anybody wants to comment or contact me, I'll be happy to talk about that. So here's the buyer's financial view of this. $475,000 in earnings. They need $100,000 in working capital, so it's going to cost them $1,287,500 to get into this. They have 20% down, 10% seller note. The SBA loan is $900, and the 3.5% is in fees is $31. So the buyer is putting out $1,319,000 for this business, and they're going to be making annual SBA loan payments of $131 and seller note payments of $59. So up here, $475,000 seller's discretionary earnings, which the current owner may be getting. The buyer is only going to get $284. Now, there's nothing wrong with $284,000, but just again, when we talk about buyer and seller aligning, that everybody needs to understand what's going on. So the key takeaways: shared vision, asset sales are common. SDE is net income plus add backs and adjustments. SDE times a multiple is the value that gives us an apples to apples comparison. Multiple is driven by size, industry, and influencers. Goodwill is the difference between price and assets. There are 3 sources of funds: buyer, lender, seller. And you really want to make the SBA an integral part of your acquisition strategy. They are going to be your best friend because they're going to be the people who help you get the deal done. And I see I might have another quick question. What interest rate are you seeing for seller notes? So we are seeing 8 and 9% for SBA loans, and we are seeing 5 to 7% on seller notes. Seller notes are usually willing to take a little bit lower interest rate. Okay.
Don, we also have one more question right above
Oh,
that.
okay. Let's see here if I can open that up. Is allocation of purchase price covered in another webinar that I could see? It is covered in the upcoming contracts and letter of intent webinar that we're doing in August. So you'll be able to see it there, or you could certainly contact me and I would be more than happy to talk to you about that.
And I just put a link in the chat for that webinar. I'll also send it in the follow-up email.
Great. Great. Well, listen, I want to thank everybody for attending today. I know that it's an overview. You can't take years and years of experience and get it down to just, an hour and a half and have everybody walk out and say, I know exactly what I'm doing selling a business. But it does give you exposure to what's going on with valuation. It does give you exposure to how financing plays into this. Our next one will be contracts and legal documents. And I encourage you, even though we've already done it and now it's just a recorded, if you want to look at the 9 steps or stages to every business transaction, it really is a good way to see what's going on from start to finish. Okay. Sally, do we have anything else we need to cover today?
No, I think that's it. Just everyone look for that email. It'll have a ton of information in it, as well as Don's contact information. I did throw that in the chat as well, but if you can't grab that before we close out, it'll be in that email.
Great. And I want to thank everybody for coming today. I appreciate the opportunity to share what we've learned here at Front Range Business with you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
So long. Hey, Vitor. How are you?